What if hope is the cruelest lie we tell ourselves? What if the very act of expecting a better tomorrow is the source of our deepest suffering? Most philosophers spend their lives constructing elaborate systems of meaning, promising that existence has purpose, that our struggles lead somewhere. But one man dared to strip away these comforting illusions and confront the raw and varnished truth of being alive. Emil Cioran, the Romanian philosopher of despair, built his entire worldview on a radical premise that hopelessness is not a disease to be cured, but a clear-sighted recognition of reality. In a world obsessed with optimism, positive thinking, and self-improvement, Cioran offered something entirely different, a philosophy that finds strange liberation in accepting the fundamental absurdity and suffering of existence. Today, we dive into the darkest corners of philosophical thought to understand why having no hope might be the most honest way to live. Born in 1911 in a small Romanian village, Emil Cioran would become one of the 20th century's most uncompromising thinkers. After suffering from debilitating insomnia in his youth, he experienced what he called a spiritual awakening, not toward light and meaning, but toward the abyss. While other philosophers sought answers, Cioran embraced questions that had no solutions. While others built systems, he demolished them. His aphoristic style, influenced by Nietzsche and Schopenhauer, cut through philosophical pretense like a blade through silk. What makes Cioran fascinating is not just his pessimism, but how he lived it. He wasn't a depressed recluse wallowing in misery. He was charming, witty, and paradoxically described himself as a happy pessimist. He spent decades in Paris, living modestly, writing books that would influence generations of thinkers, artists, and anyone brave enough to stare into the void without flinching. His work asks uncomfortable questions about birth, consciousness, suffering, and why we cling so desperately to hope when all evidence suggests it might be our greatest delusion. Before we descend into Cioran's philosophical underworld, I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt that hope was a burden rather than a blessing? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Hit that like button if you appreciate philosophy that doesn't sugarcoat reality. And subscribe, because we're exploring ideas that most channels won't touch. Now, let's begin. Cioran opens his most provocative work with a statement that shocks most readers. It is not worth the bother of killing yourself, since you always kill yourself too late. This isn't encouragement towards self-harm. It's a philosophical meditation on the tragedy of consciousness itself. For Cioran, the fundamental human problem isn't death, poverty, or loneliness. It's birth. We didn't choose to be born, yet we're thrust into existence and expected to find meaning in it. We're conscious beings trapped in a biological machine, aware of our mortality, capable of suffering in ways no other animal can imagine. This, Cioran argues, is the original sin, not disobedience to God, but the act of being born at all. Think about it. Before birth, there was perfect nothingness, no suffering, no disappointment, no existential dread. Then suddenly, you're here, equipped with enough consciousness to realize how absurd it all is, but not enough power to change the fundamental conditions of existence. You'll age, decay, and die, but not before experiencing decades of desire, frustration, loss, and the constant awareness of your own insignificance. Most philosophies try to justify existence, to explain why it's good that we're here. Buddhism seeks to end suffering through enlightenment. Christianity promises eternal paradise. Existentialism says we create our own meaning, but Cioran refuses these consolations. He sees them as elaborate coping mechanisms, ways of avoiding the stark truth that existence is fundamentally problematic. Yet there's something strangely liberating in this view. If you accept that being born is the problem, not your particular circumstances or choices, then you can stop blaming yourself for your suffering. You can stop thinking that if you just work harder, believe more strongly, or follow the right philosophy, everything will be okay. You can face the truth. Consciousness is a cosmic accident, and we're all improvising in the dark. Cioran writes, "We are all geniuses when we dream. The butcher's equal of the poet in sleep. Consciousness temporarily releases us from the burden of being someone, having an identity, pursuing goals. Dreams remind us of the blissful unconsciousness we lost at birth and will only regain in death. This isn't nihilism in the destructive sense. It's a clearing away of false hopes, a stripping down to the bare foundation of existence. And from this foundation, Cioran believes, we can build something more honest than the optimistic lies we typically tell ourselves."
Hope is considered a virtue in almost every culture. We're taught from childhood that we should never lose hope, that hope sustains us through difficult times, that it's the foundation of resilience and progress. But Cioran sees hope as one of humanity's most destructive impulses, psychological trap that perpetuates suffering rather than alleviating it. When you hope for something, you place your happiness in the future. You tell yourself that once you achieve this goal, acquire that object, or reach that state, then you'll be content. But what happens when you get what you hoped for? Either it disappoints you, failing to deliver the satisfaction you imagined, or it satisfies you briefly before new desires emerge. Hope is a treadmill that keeps you running toward an ever-receding horizon. Cioran observed that hope is particularly cruel because it prevents us from fully accepting the present moment. Instead of confronting reality as it is, we escape into fantasies about how it might be. We endure miserable jobs by hoping for promotion, stay in unfulfilling relationships by hoping they'll improve, tolerate oppressive governments by hoping for revolution. Hope becomes an anesthetic that numbs us to our actual condition. Consider the myth of Pandora's box. When Pandora opened the forbidden container, all the evils of the world escaped: disease, death, suffering, despair. But one thing remained inside: hope. Most interpretations treat this as a blessing, suggesting that humanity retained hope to help endure all those evils. But Cioran reads it differently. Perhaps hope was kept in the box because it's the worst evil of all, the one that would make all the others unbearable by making us constantly imagine alternatives to our suffering. What's the alternative to hope? Not despair exactly, but lucidity, clear-eyed acceptance of reality without the distortions hope introduces. When you abandon hope, you stop postponing your peace of mind until some future condition is met. You stop measuring your present life against an imaginary better one. You accept what is. This doesn't mean passivity or resignation in a defeated sense. It means acting without the psychological burden of expectation. You can still pursue goals, create art, love people, engage with life, but without the desperate attachment to particular outcomes that hope creates. Cioran himself exemplified this. Despite his pessimism, he wrote prolifically, maintained friendships, and engaged deeply with ideas. He wasn't paralyzed by hopelessness. He was freed by it. Without hope's tyranny, he could observe existence with brutal honesty and find a strange kind of peace in that honesty.
Schopenhauer, one of Cioran's philosophical ancestors, argued that suffering is not an accident or aberration in life, it's the default state. Pleasure is merely the temporary absence of suffering, a brief intermission in the normal program of pain. Cioran takes this insight further, suggesting that consciousness itself is essentially suffering made aware of itself. Think about the structure of human experience. When things are going well, we barely notice. Health feels like nothing until illness appears. Financial security becomes invisible until threatened. Relationships fade into the background until they're in crisis. But suffering announces itself immediately and demands attention. Pain is more vivid, more real, more undeniable than pleasure. This asymmetry reveals something fundamental about existence. We're not beings who occasionally suffer. We're suffering beings who occasionally experience relief. The baseline is discomfort, restlessness, desire, anxiety. Satisfaction is always temporary, always incomplete. As Cioran writes, consciousness is much more than the thorn. It is the dagger in the flesh. Animals suffer physically, but they lack the reflective consciousness that allows humans to suffer about suffering. A deer escaping a predator experiences fear, but it doesn't lie awake at night contemplating its mortality or questioning the meaning of its existence. Humans inherited the capacity for physical suffering from our animal ancestors, then added layers of psychological and existential suffering through consciousness. We suffer because we desire what we don't have. We suffer because we fear losing what we do have. We suffer because we remember past pain and anticipate future pain. We suffer because we compare ourselves to others. We suffer because we're aware of our mortality. We suffer because we see the gap between how things are and how we imagine they should be. Consciousness is essentially a suffering-generating machine. Yet, Cioran doesn't advocate for suicide or unconsciousness as solutions. He's fascinated by the fact that, despite this fundamental suffering, most of us choose to continue existing. We complain about life constantly, yet we cling to it desperately. We acknowledge that birth is a tragedy, yet we reproduce. This contradiction, this gap between our philosophical acknowledgement of suffering and our biological drive to persist, is one of existence's great absurdities. Understanding suffering as fundamental rather than accidental changes everything. You stop asking why me, and start asking why anyone. You stop searching for the particular cause of your unhappiness, your job, your relationship, your circumstances, and recognize that consciousness itself is the cause. This recognition doesn't eliminate suffering, but it does eliminate the false hope that you could arrange your life in a way that would. One of modernity's most persistent myths is the idea of progress, that humanity is steadily advancing towards something better, that each generation lives more comfortably and meaningfully than the last, that history has a direction and that direction is upward. Cioran demolishes this illusion with ruthless clarity. He points out that our ancestors in ancient civilizations faced the same fundamental problems we face: mortality, suffering, the search for meaning, the challenge of living with others. We've developed better technology, more sophisticated political systems, greater scientific understanding. But have we reduced human suffering? Have we found meaning? Have we learned to live together peacefully? Look at the 20th century, Cioran's century. It produced the most advanced medicine, the most refined philosophy, the most impressive technological achievements. It also produced mechanized warfare, genocide on an industrial scale, nuclear weapons, and environmental destruction that threatens all life on Earth. Our progress in some domains has been matched by regression in others. The Enlightenment promised that reason and science would liberate humanity from superstition and suffering. But reason gave us the bureaucratic efficiency to run death camps. Science gave us weapons to annihilate ourselves. Knowledge didn't make us wiser or happier. It just gave us more sophisticated ways to pursue the same ancient destructive impulses. Cioran argues that this shouldn't surprise us. Humans haven't fundamentally changed since we emerged as a species. We're still driven by the same desires, fears, and irrationalities as our cave-dwelling ancestors. We've just dressed them up in modern clothes. The belief in progress is another form of hope, another way of avoiding the recognition that human nature is essentially static and fundamentally problematic. This perspective seems depressing, but consider its implications. If there's no inevitable progress, then there's no cosmic pressure to improve, to become better, to fix yourself or society. You're released from the exhausting demand of modernity that you constantly grow, develop, optimize, and advance. You can simply be, without the additional burden of becoming something else. Moreover, abandoning the myth of progress allows for a more realistic assessment of history. We can appreciate ancient wisdom without assuming we've surpassed it. We can recognize that previous civilizations asked the same questions we ask, and sometimes found answers as good as or better than ours. Wisdom isn't accumulated linearly across generations. Each person must discover it anew. So where does all this lead? If birth is a tragedy, hope is a trap, consciousness is suffering, and progress is an illusion, what's left? Cioran offers something unexpected: liberation through lucidity. A strange freedom found in facing reality without comforting lies. When you abandon hope, you discover something remarkable. Without expectations about the future, you can fully inhabit the present. Without believing that happiness depends on particular outcomes, you stop being tyrannized by desire. Without thinking you're supposed to find meaning, you stop agonizing over meaninglessness. The acceptance of life's fundamental absurdity becomes, paradoxically, a kind of peace. Cioran calls this state lucidity, the clear vision that comes from removing all the psychological filters we normally use to make existence tolerable. Most people avoid this clarity because they fear it would lead to despair or paralysis. But Cioran suggests the opposite, that lucidity is energizing precisely because it demands nothing of you except honesty. This isn't the resignation of a defeated person. It's the serenity of someone who has stopped fighting reality. Think of it like this: if you're struggling in quicksand, every movement to escape makes you sink faster. But if you stop struggling, spread your weight, and accept your situation, you can float. Cioran's pessimism works similarly. By accepting rather than fighting existence's problematic nature, you reduce your suffering. He finds beauty in this perspective. There's something pure about acknowledging that we're accidents of biology on a meaningless planet in an indifferent universe. It strips away pretension and self-importance. It makes every moment of genuine connection, every experience of beauty, every laugh despite everything, all the more precious because it's not owed to us, not part of some cosmic plan. Cioran's happy pessimism isn't a contradiction. He's happy precisely because he expects nothing, because he's abandoned the exhausting project of trying to justify or improve existence, because he can observe life's absurdity with the detachment of a spectator at an incomprehensible play. As he writes, without the possibility of suicide, I would have killed myself long ago. The option to exit gives him the freedom to stay. This is the art of having no hope, not despair, not depression, not withdrawal, but a radical acceptance that allows for engagement without attachment, observation without judgment, existence without the burden of meaning. its philosophy as spiritual discipline, pessimism as path to peace. Emil Cioran spent his life exploring the darkest corners of human consciousness. And what he found there wasn't horror, but honesty. His pessimism isn't a mood or a pathology, it's a rigorous philosophical position that challenges every comforting assumption we make about existence. In a culture saturated with optimism, positive thinking, and the relentless demand to find meaning, Cioran offers permission to acknowledge what we all secretly know. Life is fundamentally absurd. Suffering is intrinsic to consciousness, and hope often causes more pain than it prevents. But here's what makes Cioran essential rather than merely depressing. His pessimism opens a door that optimism keeps locked. By accepting the worst, you become unshakable. By abandoning hope for a better future, you discover the only moment you actually have, this one. By recognizing that existence has no inherent meaning, you're free to create meaning on your own terms, without the weight of cosmic significance crushing every choice. Cioran shows us that staring into the abyss doesn't destroy you, it clarifies you. So I'll leave you with this question. What would your life look like if you stopped hoping it would get better and simply accepted it as it is? Would that be liberation or defeat? Share your thoughts below, and if this exploration of philosophy's dark side resonated with you, subscribe for more journeys into uncomfortable truths. Until next time, stay lucid.